the Redcaps Podcast, a podcast where we dip our caps into the blood of our listeners and we ramble on about old school games. In today's episode, we are going to talk about Dungeon 23, the OGL, board games, and a bunch more. And just so you're not listening to me ramble on and on, I brought a friend with me. Remember, no mortal can outrun a recap. So as always, I hope you can sit back, listen, and enjoy. Todd runs a fantastic YouTube channel called Hexed Press. And lately you can find him on pretty much every other social media that is out there as well. I reached out to him originally so we could sit down and have a chat about Dungeon 23 because it seems pretty cool from an idea standpoint, just not something I'm participating in. And I knew he was very interested in it as well. So he agreed to come on to chat with me. But as happens often when you get two nerds that have a lot of shared hobbies together, we went all over the place with the discussion. There is a lot of Dungeon 23 content, but you will find something in here for all of your nerdy pleasures, and I hope you guys will enjoy it. So I invite you to be a fly on the wall and listen to this chat between Todd and I. All right, everybody, I am joined by Todd, the amazing host of the Hexed Press YouTube channel. If you've heard of my stuff, you have undoubtedly at some point gone onto YouTube, done a search for OSR or hex crawls or something, and came across Todd's channel, and you should be subscribed to it and listening to it. Todd, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. So I want to bring you on today because you've been chatting quite a bit on social media and some on the YouTube channel about this new fad that everybody's just rushing into for this year, Dungeon 23. It's the new hotness. It's what everybody's going to do for at least another 3 or 4 days before they all get bored of it and move on. But
absolutely.
How have you looked at the Dungeon 23? Or you've actually come up with a couple other ones. You've got Hex 23 and Finish at 20. I'd love to hear about those as well.
Hex 23, I can't take credit for, but somebody sent it to me, and I thought, of course, my Hex is in my name, so it makes sense. I mean, the whole thing's been amazing. I mean, this is what, of course, you or I don't have this kind of reach to be able to post something on Twitter, and next thing you know, a whole cottage industry has sprung up around it as a movement, but that's basically what happened. I think his name is Sean McVeigh, but I don't want to get that wrong.
Sean McCoy. He created Mothership.
Right. Throw out the tweet. Hey, it basically was just a room a day for 365 days. Go. And then everything else sprung from there. My little contribution, if you want to call it that, is finish at 23. For those of us who have all kinds of stuff that has been laying unfinished, and I wanted to harness all this energy that he's helped create, but actually turn it towards the stuff that all has been sitting in piles. I know I have stuff that I am really terrible at behind and need to get done. So I thought, let me see if I can take some of that energy and push it into something that, at least for me, will be more immediately, not useful is not the right word, but fulfilling, in that is finishing up things that have been laying around far too long. And then if there's any leftover time, then, we can make dungeons and hexes and all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah, his original goal, I think, was to have 12 levels, which each level having the number of days of whatever is in that month. So a level per month, so to speak. There's been a ton of tools and people talking about. So as this came out and excitement grew, and people are like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I can do that. It's a dungeon, a room a day. What could be possibly go wrong with that? And as people are looking at it, there's a lot of discussion around, hey, do I buy a new day planner? Do I get a fancy journal? Do I do this on index cards? Do I do it digitally? Do I do it? And it almost feels to me, I fall into YouTube rabbit holes. I don't know if you do as well, but there's the whole like bullet journaling and journaling aspect of things. And it feels like people now are spending more time talking about what tools they're going to use Dungeon 23 for Dungeon 23 than actually doing Dungeon 23.
I mean, there was certainly a lot of that, especially last month, right? And I went ahead and got it because I couldn't resist seeing all the pictures. I went and got one of those fancy Japanese journals that's got the dot grid on one side and the daily kind of entries on the other side. And actually, I think is in terms of a good tool, if you're going to stick more or less by the default kind of Dungeon 23, actually it works pretty well because on the daily things, you can write down a little word to sentence about the room. And then on the right, if you're so inclined, you can draw the room and number it, I guess. But yeah, I mean, everyone, all this stuff, there's definitely fetish aspects to it. I love notebooks and pens and things like that. I think I posted, I got a new pen, a new fountain pen to use. I got my journal to use.
What kind of pen did you end up getting? I saw that you had the picture, but I didn't catch what it was.
Yeah, it's called a Lamy, or I don't know if it's pronounced Lamy or Lamy. I believe it's German. It's a fountain pen, but they're very reasonably priced. I think $20 or $30. They're really nice fountain pens to be like fountain pens, and you can use cartridges, or they have these little converters, so you can use any kind of other ink in them. And I just really like it a lot. I don't know. I've always had a thing for fountain pens. So an excuse to kind of get a new pen to go with my new fancy Japanese notebook, was all worth it. All worth it for me.
Yeah, I've gotten into fountain pens a little bit. My father turns pens, so he'll take a piece of wood and create a pen from it.
Oh, nice.
So like this one here that I've got here is a fountain pen of his creation, and yeah, very similar to what you're saying. It's got cartridges in it, but I can add the converter and use whatever ink I want. And I used to always be like a ballpoint or even like a Sharpie person, but now I'm kind of moving more towards the fountain pens and enjoying
Fountain
those.
pens are nice, and they give it a little character. I mean, that's where the kind of fetishy things comes in, right? Because you walk into a place and someone needs you to sign something, you pull out your ballpoint, but then you pull out a fountain pen. It's a little bit like, ooh, check me out. Like, I got an eye patch and a fedora hat and my fountain pen.
And you got to have the nice scarf too to go.
That's right. That's right. A little cravat or scarf to go along. It's all of a piece.
So once people get past the whole planning for what they're going to do, and they've gotten past the excitement of I've got all my new tools and they're sitting down, what do you think the end result of all this is going to look like for most people? So if we were to grab 10 random people that have decided to participate in this, at the end of it, what do you think they will actually have in their notebooks? And conversely, what do you think the general person would hope to have in that notebook?
I mean, it's a great question. I feel like generally everyone wants to get done, right? I think everyone is looking at this. And just to, for the dungeons, right, the end of the days, having this 12-level mega dungeon, I think there's also like World Building 23, which has its own goals. Hex 23 has its own goals. So I think ideally everyone wants to get to their goal. I think that's kind of, but I think those end dates are going to be, there's probably one person that's going to actually get to the end or close. And then you could probably roll some dice with, 3d6 to see how many weeks the rest of the folks kind of get. There's probably going to be some kind of bell curve about, I doubt too many people are going to drop off week 2, which I think we're in week 2 now, but probably in a couple weeks, they'll probably, if people are honest, that's been sort of dropping away, and they'll probably keep dropping. And then if you get it past the 6th or 7th month mark, maybe there's one where you're more likely to finish because you've gotten so far, right? And then there's probably going to be a mix of just rooms and stuff that maybe don't even really do much. I mean, like if I just had a random room, I suppose I could try to fit it into something that I'm making, but probably not, because if I have an idea of something else I'm making, unless the themes match up, I'm probably going to go, well, I don't need this, I don't know, Barrier Peaks like science fiction surgery room that I created for Dungeon 23, because I'm working on a dungeon that's full of goblins and orcs and bugbears that's below the earth. So am I going to find spots for this material, or is it going to sit in a shoebox, digital or analog kind of shoebox, where I'll probably forget about it? That's probably the grim truth. And then hopefully you just got enough enjoyment about creating and sharing the stuff along the way that you got your mileage out of it.
That's what the part that worries me too is I think you're right that hopefully if people go through, it ends up being more about getting your reps in. You've got your practice swings in. You've got you've proven to yourself that you can take a creative item and move forward. But I really think, from what a lot of I've seen, I don't know how much consistency there is between the rooms. I don't even know if there was ever a goal to have consistency, like having it a theme thing, because I'm seeing a lot of rooms that look cool on their own. Like you see a single day, like Monday's room was really cool, but how does that fit in for the rest of that week or the rest of that month and have a flow that would make sense in actual play or in actual utility?
Yeah, it's probably pretty debatable, because I think the original tweet was just, 365 days, room a day, and presumably you're just doing rooms. And then people started to really glom onto the concept and kind of improve it. Then he wrote, I think, a post on Medium where he went into a little bit more detail about it. But I think his goal, and I think some of the goals came out of the original one, was just, it's about kind of getting your writing in, right? A way to get yourself into writing every day, which for writers, people doing and creating, it's really important to get good habits. And this is kind of a vehicle for doing that. But as I'm sure I was definitely not the only one pointing out, as a lot of people, that may have been the intent or part of the intent, but a lot of people took it as, I'm going to have a finished product at the end of it. In which case, things like what you're saying, theme, connection between rooms, all this stuff, you want to make sense because you want to have something to use. It's not about, oh, great, I did some free writing. I did some journaling. And it's just because from a certain standpoint, the journaling for journaling's sake is fine, because you say, get your reps in, do all this stuff. And that at the end of the day, that's it. But I think for a lot of other people, that wasn't really what the energy they were getting into wasn't just journaling for journaling's sake. It was, I'm I'm going to have a mega dungeon at the end of it. And that's kind of, I don't know if you had a chance to check it out, but I put together a helper document, and my whole helper, the point of it is to, for those of us who may need and want structure to actually, who are on the path of, I want to actually complete something, is I tried to make a document to give a lot more structure to the Dungeon 23 to have people think about themes and how to get the stuff. So at the end of a week or a month, you don't end up with a bunch of rooms that seem cool individually, but together just make a mess. Instead, I feel like you would have like a level of a dungeon. So I mean, I think you and I are on the same wavelength, but really it's all about what are you bringing to it? What is your goal coming out of it as a person? And then, just try to stay focused on what that is. And if it is having a dungeon that makes sense, assuming we're not looking at Funhouse dungeon that just anything goes, then you're going to want to think about those as you're writing your, putting your rooms together, basically. And there are tools, mine and others, who try to give, I think, a bit more structure to help out with that, if that's the goal.
Yeah, like some of the stuff that you've put together and others I've seen out there almost seem to want to try to focus folks a little bit the way that the Gygax, Gygax 75, was it Gygax?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yep.
Thank you. I can't believe I just blanked on that. I've done it myself. The Gygax 75 challenge was done up where it gives a nice steady progression and focus on it, rather than saying, hey, go create half a dozen hexes and
totally. And there's no wrong approach, right? It's just that what do you want out of it? And I think a lot of people are taking this energy to try to come up with a product, or if it's for their own games or for put on itch or whatever. And yeah, to that extent, having that extra structure helps. But if you just want to get your creativity out there, then you don't need any. And that was kind of my whole thing with the documents. If you don't need this stuff, it does not help you, just toss it. No skin off my nose. But to the extent that you find it helpful, here are some ways to kind of structure yourself, because the original challenge was, I think, I don't want to say by design, because it was just put out there kind of flippantly, and I don't think they necessarily expected it to turn into a big thing, but that had basically zero structure. Just throw rooms together, go.
So in all things tabletop related, everybody's got different definitions of stuff. What is a mega dungeon to you? Is a mega dungeon 12 layers, or does it have to be 200 layers? Is it 5 room? Is it more than 5 rooms but less than? Like, what is a mega dungeon, and how does one qualify it?
I mean, I think it has to be kind of large, right? I would say, so we're getting a mega dungeon. There is a size component. It's because I could think about in terms of mega dungeons, you could look at it and say, okay, it's multiple dungeons put together. Right. I mean, I think that's kind of the way you look. I look at something like Caverns of Thracia, which is maybe not even someone's conventional idea of a mega dungeon. But to me, it is, because you have these multiple layers of dungeons, and then at least a couple of them are kind of different from each other. It's not just dungeon all the way down. And even in the more sort of, I guess, old school, even more old school than that kind of gonzo territory, you have something like Greyhawk, which, even though it was all thematically part of all the basement levels underneath Castle Greyhawk, in the Gygax 75, I think in the articles that Ray posted about that, the tidbits, they talk about all the different things on different levels. Each level could be vastly different than the level before, right? So, this one's filled with fire elementals, and on this one there's a bowling alley with giants, and this one. So I think it has to be something. There has to be some thematic, I think, change-ups in there, or at least there are. I mean, every time I say something like this, I think about, well, does this mega dungeon have it? No, it doesn't. But I feel like it's got to have something. Has to be tied together in some way. Castle Greyhawk, it's tied together because you're all underneath Castle Greyhawk. That's kind of the connection. These are all parts of Castle Greyhawk. In Caverns of Thracia, you kind of have a time and space connection there, as well as the stuff had been piled on each other over time, and have connections in terms of some of the factions that are running around each pieces. But at least for me, I think maybe differentiating what I would like to see from Mega Dungeon as opposed to maybe what it must be is, I think, some different kind of, and I don't want to say environments feels like too big, because I don't mean like lava level and ice level, whatever, right? But I feel like having some spaces that have their own identity, that are put together, and it's not just a dungeon, but take whatever dungeon you like, and just, instead of having it be 50 rooms, now it's 1,500 rooms. Like, sure, that's massive, and I suppose that could maybe meet someone's technical requirements for a mega dungeon, but I think maybe to be effective, I feel like you need to be able to, just to keep interest, to keep people wanting to go further.
Yeah, I think the way you're describing it makes sense, especially if you want to have a discussion with your players later, or even when your players are remembering what they've done, they can be like, hey, do you remember when we got to this? Like, I know you said not to do this, but can you remember when we got to the demon themed area of the dungeon? That was really cool. Or when we moved into it almost demarks periods of time if they've gone through as they've reached a certain spot.
Yeah, and they could be markers of all kinds. I mean, that's what's going to be memorable. Like, oh my gosh, we got to the necropolis. Oh my gosh, we got to this thing. Like, we got to the giant bowling alley. Like, wasn't that like crazy? Like, there are these ways of sort of identifying the parts. I mean, classically, you could do that by counting levels as well. Like, we got to level 7, but I don't know if that's enough anymore. Maybe it was at some point.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because often, like the way I used to define mega dungeon, and I've kind of revised how I look at it now. But it used to be a mega dungeon would be this is an alternative to an overland campaign. Your mega dungeon is basically your campaign is going to be vastly stored in this dungeon, and the rest of the world doesn't overly matter. Because most likely your players will explore very little of it because their time is going to be sucked up in the down below. But I think it's very possible to have mega dungeons that just exist in a world that people jump into and maybe never complete. They just jump into for a bit, they jump back out, and go that route.
I mean, I think there are definitely some of those ones when I was reading back. I forget which. Someone had found it's years ago now. One of these like newsletters from one of those big gaming groups, Midwest kind of gaming groups from the late 70s, and I think they had multiple mega dungeons depending on the group, and I think different GMs, whoever was the GM, kind of they had their mega dungeons on the map, and so different groups would travel here, travel there, and I think just getting down to different areas and then also cleaning up things that you might have discovered on an area before, or you let loose an ancient evil, now you got to go fix that up, or you got cursed, and now you got to go uncurse yourself, or at one point they got geshed and sent off on some quest for an evil cleric, I remember, and so they had to go figure out how to either do that quest or get out from doing it. I think they ended up figuring out a way to get out from doing it. Then they, of course, they had to go back and get their vengeance on that evil cleric, But they all had different spots on this board essentially where they could go and move, which is great if you have a huge group. I think if you're a single person, how many mega dungeons do you want to maintain? Assuming you're not buying them in books and like, oh, here's Barrel Maze and here's something else. At that point, maybe for what's reasonable for a single GM for a single group, it might be that here's this one massive challenge, and maybe there's other dungeons, but they're not mega dungeons. They're just a couple levels and this, that, and I'm done.
You mentioned Barrel Maze, of like the big well-known mega dungeons that have been out over the last decade or so. Do you have any favorites from that list?
Oh man, I've never run a mega dungeon. I've read some. I read Barrel Maze on the channel a couple of months ago, maybe longer now, and I thought it was good. I liked it. It is one that kind of doesn't fit the mold in terms of having a bunch of different themes. It is really all around this theme of this kind of barrel maze. Yeah. I think what's interesting there, the different ways you can access the barrel maze and having a lot of those entrances be available from jump. Right. It's not, oh, here's the main entrance and maybe there's one or two sneaky entrances. It's no, you have this whole basically open horizontal playing field that you can go and you can get to different areas through there, which you will discover or not, depending on what you kind of go exploring. But you have a lot over there. Now, I've heard various things that people have run it in terms of, do they feel like they need to add things or add kind of more motivations or add, it's not necessarily, it's one that I guess probably depending on the table, I've heard some people may have had issues kind of keeping their players focused on there or maintaining sort of interest in it. I'm not sure it reads well. I think I read the first part of Stonehell that seemed pretty interesting and just at the top and kind of the first level or two. But I think the main issue is going to be, and it may not even be something that these dungeons can solve in themselves, is that interest part. And that's where I think having the thematics, especially now, the way we tend to play games now as opposed to the way we played them 30, 40 years ago, is when you can have these kind of things that are thematically interesting, connected to the overall dungeon, but have its own kind of unique in terms of the kind of in terms of the dungeon sort of look and feel and things going on. I think it's going to help with that maintaining interest, because if you're just drilling down level to level of stone corridors and doors and whatever, then not that you can't get interest up, but you're really going to have to push it more. Whereas you're going to kind of pique a lot of folks' sense of discovery and wanting to check things out when you do run across really interesting different areas in these spaces.
Yeah, I completely agree. You the two that you mentioned, both Barrel Maze and Stonehell, would be high on my list of my favorite ones. But you're completely right that the burnout of the having done the same thing for a while can definitely reach people. I think the big difference is in the Mega Dungeon heyday, you had had more groups. You were running different groups. Like the DM would often be running multiple groups through the same dungeon at different points, and there was almost a competition aspect of it. Of hey, we got this far. Like what we just mentioned earlier when you were talking about like, hey, we got to the bowling alley with the Giants. The that competition aspect of it and the wanting to be able to that was there and then trying to get back to it or what have you. I think that's a way that GMs can kind of try to keep the interest a little bit in terms of even if you are not personally running other human parties, having a rival party to the party that is trying to get deeper or messing with them when they're down there and letting the players likewise do it might be part of a way to keep that interesting.
Oh, totally. And I think if I was running an open table in a gaming store where I have a consistent, at least group, not necessarily the same players, but different group, and I'm running it in sort of the old school, or we could maybe call it, where you're basically finishing back in town every
the West Marches
every session. Yeah. So where you can constantly getting a new group, and each different group is leaving notes for the things before, like look, see where we got, and you're kind of coming to kind of more beer and pretzel style, hanging out with friends. It's almost like when I used to play, I haven't played in a long time, but I used to play Destiny, and it was all about, even though we were playing the same missions over and over again, but you're playing with your friends, you're having fun, just kind of doing that thing. But nowadays, I think that people are more into kind of the what's going on, the kind of story aspect or the world aspect. Like my players are really, and I love it, are really into like, what are all these different powers doing in the world? Like, what are the political things going on? What's moving and shaking in the world? They're not so interested in just like going down another level in the dungeon, right? There's just those are the things that drive them. And I think that's true probably for a lot of players. And so then that video game aspect of like Super Mario, all the old school games, just like, let's see if I can go one more level deeper. Did you see I found that one tube? It goes deeper. Maybe it doesn't come up, especially not, I mean, and I have a single group. Now, if you like, I think you're totally right in terms of if you have almost competing sets of players running around in there, that's going to have a totally different kind of vibe than not. But unfortunately, I don't think most people get to play with having a big pool like that.
Yeah, I think that's sadly the truth there. All right, so let's say that I'm going to take part in it. I'm not, but let's pretend I was going to take part in it. I simply just don't have the time. It's not that I'm against the project. I think it's awesome. I look forward to hearing what everybody does out of it. I don't personally have the time for it. But if I was going through that, in my head, there's almost two different art forms that come with creating a dungeon. So you've got the actual mapping of it, which is an art form all in itself, and then there's the theming / stocking of the dungeon.
Yeah.
I know that there's no way that I'm ever going to be a person knowing my own skill sets. I'm never going to be Dyson Logos. I can't create those beautiful dungeons, but there's lots of generators and there's online tools that help me draw those out if I want them.
Yep.
But from the stocking standpoint, what tools would you recommend people look at? I've got some in my head, but I wanted to kind of hear from you.
Oh man. I mean, there's so many. So first of all, something I did mention to my helper, and I will reiterate here, if the drawing, I would say if either side, like either the writing or the drawing is getting in your way, then save it for the end. Like I feel like you can pretty much do your whole mega dungeon and not draw any of the rooms. You can come back and make the actual physical drawings, but just saying, hey, 30 by 30 square, entrance in the north wall and the east wall, and then, connects to these rooms, I think is totally fine at this point. And by the way, for those folks who may feeling like I don't have time, the original concept idea was you could just write a word, just title the room, abattoir, move on, hallway, move on. He even said one of the guidance in his Medium article was if you don't feel anything, you got to put empty room, just put empty room, move on. Remember, you can come back to the stuff. It's not like you're going to turn it in like your SAT or something at the end of it and never get to look at it again. It's like you can always come back and fiddle faddle with it later. And in fact, in my helper, I suggested doing your room mapping at the end of the month. Like go write all your rooms out, get all that done, and then you can come back at the end and use your pen and pencil or dungeon scrawl or whatever to come in and fill in rooms. Now in terms of stocking, there's too many. There's like the D30, there's those D30 digital books that are good. There's one I linked to it on my forums. I can't remember if I can find it still. It's called, oh shoot, hold on, let me see if I can look it up real quick, because it's really good and has tons of stocking things, and it might be one that's a little bit unknown. I covered it on my channel, and I was just amazed by it was totally unexpected. It was one of those, I don't know if you've had that where you've gotten something someone send it to you or you've asked for it and you're like, I don't know, I'm just going to look at a lark, and then it's just such a surprise in a good way. Yeah, it was just like, oh my gosh, this thing is crazy. It's called let's see. Drop.
While you're looking that one up, I'll also throw out into the list Tomb of Adventure Design. I think is a great resource as well.
Oh yeah, also a good
or
one.
Just the DMG for everybody who doesn't have a copy of first edition DMG. There's a whole way to generate your dungeon right inside that.
And fifth edition's DMG is good too. I think, and someone actually said that the really only DMG that kind of stinks in that regard is the fourth edition DMG. So apparently the fourth edition DMG, which I think I have somewhere but I haven't looked up, is awful. But first, second, third, fifth, they all have tools for that. And it was called Diaries of Dungeon Design.
Ooh.
And it's really good. It had just so much different things. I just remember and you can check out my read along if you want to take a look inside before you buy. It's from Shield Ice Studio, and I think it's the full title is Realm Fables: Diaries of Dungeon Design. It's on drive-through and other places, and it's just got. And if you go to the drive-through page, you can see they got some screenshots, or you can check out search it on YouTube. I'm sure my read along will come up, and it's got all kind. It's got crazy amount of content for using for building out your dungeons. And yeah, the DMGs are all good. And there's Don John and other places. There's tons of tools. There's, of course, you can look at Dice and Logos and all the maps he's thrown online. I mean, you could probably just do something like that, like just take a Dice and Logos map and forget drawing your own, and just, since all his maps are basically have no, I mean, he may give it a thematic name, like here's the mines of the Dwarven King, but you could just cross that out, put wherever you want, and just, here's my challenge is going to be now filling out this, stocking this, and not even worrying about the drawing part.
Yeah, and he has large packs of maps too that you can grab, like more maps than you'll probably ever need, and you can just try to find creative ways of linking them. That would be a very, very cool idea as well. The when we're looking at starting this off, like if you were going to start it off, actually, I guess maybe I didn't even ask you. I apologize. Have you started doing Dungeon 23, or are you going to do your finish it and get other things?
I'm doing
first?
Finish it. So I have a zine that's like 2 years late, or it will be 2 years in April, that I'm desperately trying to finish. So that is my initial finish it. So right now, my finish it part is probably closest to Hex 23, because my zine is all about kind of hex crawl stuff, and I wanted to have a starter adventure to go along, but one that's kind of a hex crawl focused adventure. It's not just a, hopefully at the end of you have an area that if your party wants to hang around and stay in, they'll be able to, and there'll be enough stuff. But the idea is to give an adventure, but it's an overland travel based adventure. So I'm kind of building that out. So I am using Finish It 23. I'm trying to put something on there every day. I have it. It's up on itch. You can follow along, and I do post on social media and different places when I update it. And I'm trying to be one of the things I'm trying to do, and who knows if it'll work or not, is I'm not trying to get too ahead of myself. And I'm also trying to ignore what other people are doing. Because I think you can get it can be very inspiring to see all these people putting out amazing work. And like, look, this is my day 2 of my journal. I've done like 5 pages worth of stuff, but it can also be very disheartening. And then you feel like, oh, if I'm writing a word, and this person's writing 3 pages, like, what am I doing? Right. So I'm trying not to do that. And I'm also trying to be very consistent in my effort. So I don't want to put out like I'm going to do a bunch today and then tomorrow I fall flat. Like for me, it's part of getting that consistency up, because that's kind of been I'm a terrible procrastinator, and that's kind of just feeds into my procrastination if I start falling behind. And, so I want to be like, no, I'm just going to do this bit. And if I have more, I'm going to just hold on to it, maybe make a note so I don't forget it. And then I'll come back and do that bit tomorrow and just do bit. So far, so good, but it's only 1 week.
Yeah.
So it's easy to feel good now.
Yeah, I mean, I rocked my diet for the first week of this month. We'll see how week 2 goes.
Exactly.
Yeah, you had mentioned that like you see this on social media and stuff. You're across a ton of different social media platforms over the last while. I've seen it looks like you've been experimenting for the last couple of months with YouTube Shorts and on Instagram, and you've joined the wave of us that have also dabbled with Mastodon or the Fediverse, whichever you would like to call it. Of all these various platforms that you've kind of either dove in fully or dipped toes in, how have you found them? Because at least you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've followed you for a long while, but mostly all from YouTube.
I think that's where most of my audience is.
Yeah.
So I always thought that was weird. Like, I went on Twitter forever, and I always thought my Twitter follower count would be much higher than YouTube. I just assumed that YouTube, my mistaken assumption was that I felt like YouTube to subscribe to somebody was higher commitment than Twitter, but at least it doesn't seem like it, because I have many more, not that I have a lot, but I have many more YouTube followers than Twitter. So yeah, I don't know, but I like Twitch, like I stream on Twitch and nobody watches me on Twitch. Like nobody, like I'll get these Twitch summaries. One person watched for 2 seconds and switched off. Like, I don't know if I'm just, because it's usually during the day that no people just aren't on Twitch. Like, I don't know if I'm not, whatever it is, like my audience is for the most part on YouTube. But it's been really interesting. Who knows what's going to happen? Because I said this before, and people, were, and rightfully so. I mentioned TikTok. I've been on TikTok for the last couple months, and what's fascinating there is it feels like there's a really much different audience, and not an audience, but just community on TikTok. So I felt like I've seen a lot of different perspectives on TikTok that I don't see, at least the way the YouTube algorithms work, or what gets surfaced to me on YouTube is very different than the stuff that gets surfaced to me on TikTok. So I've really appreciated that. Now, who knows what's going to happen? I know, bad TikTok, bad China government, but then it's like, okay, it's what's funny about that is, not to say the Chinese government and stuff is great and good, but someone's commenting me on YouTube, which is owned by Google, who's also is not, talking to me about how terrible TikTok is or Facebook. It's like they're all owned by these giants that who knows what nefarious deals. They're probably all working behind the scenes together. I'm sure Google's selling data to the Chinese government to use in Facebook to do what, like, it's none of them are good. And hopefully the Fediverse, if there's one thing of the Fediverse, is like, hopefully what the Fediverse is doing is bringing that out of that kind of ecosystem where you're not dependent on these companies none of them are looking out for our best interest, right? Let's have no illusions. Google, Facebook, none of Meta, whatever, none of them are looking out for us. So we're just picking between like the devils that we feel like we know or understand that we probably don't, and those we don't. So I'm all for the Fediverse, and I'm hoping it takes off, and I'm hoping other things sprout from that. Like, I would love to see, well, what is going to be the YouTube of the Fediverse, and how can they make that something that's viable? I'm sure there already is something out there. I just haven't heard of it yet. You know what is it?
So there's it's actually been around probably longer than most of the big Mastodon type stuff is. It's called PeerTube. It's also part of the Fediverse. You can subscribe if you know how you subscribe on YouTube. You subscribe to somebody on PeerTube, you can see them on your Mastodon feed. Okay, cool. And there's tons of different instances for it. There's different universities that have their course material up on it and stuff like that. The problem with it is a lot of the instances with it are incredibly small and niche, and they're niche in a way that probably turns off most people in terms of the content that they're going for. But the technology is there for it, and it's definitely interesting. I like that you've called out Twitter and stuff. I tried over December, so I took most of December as a break for myself. But I was like, hey, I saw Todd doing this, and I've seen a few other folks doing it. Let's try to make a YouTube short. So I sat down and I didn't go on camera. I just was doing it all via like screen capture, and I tried to create a sentient sword from the old school Essentials rules in 60 seconds. That the process of creating that sword is not difficult. The process of creating it in a 60-second window was incredibly difficult. Not so much difficult, but it was way more involved than I thought it would be in terms of how much editing I would have to do. So props to you. I'm not sure how much editing you have to do on your stuff, but that was because you do it a lot more consistently than I do. That was
you know how I think a lot of us have gone towards low prep GMing. I am now in extremely low prep video. Like, I do next to no editing these days, like, unless I really goof up, and I'll try to make note of it, because I'm doing everything myself, right? I don't have somebody else I'm sending it off to. So if I'm editing it, I would just find I could spend hours and hours editing it, and I just was finding that it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it, and it wasn't like the videos that I edited down to be as concise were like performing much better than my other videos. And people actually would tell me like, oh, I like this video where you're standing in your kitchen just kind of doing that, as opposed to sitting in front of this other space. So, and I've seen other people where I'm like, you know what, some channels I really like that have tons of followers, they're like filming in their in their living room, and they're not filming in some perfect studio space and obviously some people are very successful in their studio spaces, and ideally that's what I would love to have, because I want to, but you don't have to have that stuff. And what I found is, like, in TikTok, and I'm sure, and there's a really good iPhone app I don't know if it's connected to TikTok some way. It's called CapCut, CAPCUT. And essentially you can create videos in there. You can edit videos in there. In fact, you'll even do captions if you want to, though I tend to let TikTok do my captions. I think it does a little bit better job. But what they do is when you're natively filming in TikTok, and what also CapCut will do, is that you set the time of your video before you start recording. And this is kind of similar, like I think if you tried to record a YouTube short directly, you'll say it's 60 seconds. And then you'll see it kind of go up, and then you'll hit it. And so what I've done is I've just tried to make like a point, say something, get it out there, and not try to like do something where I'm gonna have to do a whole thing. Like if I was gonna do a sentient weapon, what I would do is I would create the sentient weapon myself, post it on the screen, and give a 60-second blurb about it, and then go. Right. And then it's done. And then maybe I'll say, hey, go to YouTube and watch the longer video where I'm gonna walk through doing this sentient sword. But that's it. And then launch it out there and see what happens.
See, that would have been the smarter way of doing it, is saying, hey, I made this, go check the long video format. That I'm going to steal that idea moving forward.
You should.
So of your early YouTube videos, like when I first found you, again, everybody should be watching your stuff because you've got lots of really great content on there. But one of the things that made me watch your videos and go and make me recognize you, like maybe the second or third time I saw you before I actually subscribed, was the fish wallpaper in the background.
Oh, in my kitchen.
Every time I would see your video, I'm like, oh, that's the fish wallpaper guy. And was that there before you, or is that something you added?
No, that is my kitchen in my apartment. There, I have a kitchen, and that is our kitchen wallpaper. There's a bunch of this fish, and that was where, so pre-COVID, pre-everything else, when I would do these, part of what made it really hard, if you go back and look at my history, my video recording, I do some, and I just and they'd be like, and I do that. And there's one point where I spent like 6 or 7 months where I just didn't get anything up, and I was kind of thinking about just calling quits, and I started again. And part of that was that I'm in a very small apartment in Brooklyn, New York, and there's nowhere for me to record. I mean, if my wife, and then when my wife and my daughter came around, they're around, there's just noise, everything. It's just too much. Like I got to tell them, like, hey, I'm streaming. So I'm recording. So I'd have to do everything kind of late at night. And I would just go into the kitchen where we have the only one kind of big table, and I'd set up all my stuff, do all my things. And behind me would be part of why I picked it is here's this wallpaper that's essentially just inoffensive. It's kind of right behind me, and I would go. Now, since COVID, since a lot of other stuff, we were both working from home. We kind of got this little sort of desk set up in our bedroom, which has, it's not actually green screen, but it's kind of a similar color wall behind me. And that's why most of my later videos, you see the green wall, because that's where I am. I'm in that little, which seems expansive, but I think, as I mentioned, like it's like a window, like right off camera on one side, like my bed right off camera on the other side. Like I'm literally in like I'm in the 5 by 5 foot, probably even less than that, like combat melee space. And that is my whole world just in that spot. But yeah, I used to get lots of compliments when I would take like work calls and things, and go video, and I'd have the nice wallpaper behind me. And it was nice because it gave me like a professional look. But all my stuff is now moved on, so I don't really, I think, unless I record a short or something late at night on my phone in the kitchen, probably won't see the fish wallpaper. But yeah, it was funny. It was definitely something that was people took note of. Some nice wallpaper too.
It was definitely. It was something like I always be like, oh yeah, because it draws the eyes. It was really good. We're now in 2023, and I don't know about you, but I'm still writing 2022 when I sign stuff. But looking back at 2022, what was your favorite RPG product, or do you have?
Oh man, I keep thinking. I think now that I've been doing this, I realize that there's a lot of work, or at least preparation, doing kind of best ofs, because I'm always like scratching my brain. Like what did I do this last year? Like when was this? Like, and I, like I say, like, oh yeah, I covered this a few months ago. And then I'll look and I'm like, geez, it was, in like, March last year, or like maybe it was November of 2020, like something weird. There's been a lot of good stuff. I'm gonna pull up. Let me see. Hold on. While I think about it, let me just pull it up so that I can think about it. Yeah, 2022. I mean, I got to look at some things I hadn't looked at before. Like I did Pathfinder 2nd Edition, which I hadn't looked at. I mean, it's not new and floating around. It was really interesting looking at it. There's a lot of things I kind of feel like, I don't know if I'm going to play it. Like, I don't know if I want to play Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but I always look at it and say, oh, there's some really interesting things in here. And I like the way they kind of took some of the kind of the aspect of feats, I think, and kind of really push down that path of going sort of feat based and these different actions. I feel like it can get, and like tags and things, because I feel like they almost took it to their logical conclusion with a crunchy game, like all these tags. I wonder if part of me is like, is this going to be too many tags? Like, how many tags can I keep straight in my head before I just go crazy, kind of thing? But that was interesting. Let me see here. So there was like a Manual of Hexterity was beautiful. Is one of these beautiful kind of cartographic map books with a lot of little stories for the different hexes. Not super crunchy or anything, but just I feel like, because again, like I was saying, like there are lots of things I don't know if I'm going to play, but do they inspire me? And I find sometimes with those kind of books, like they're not maybe not crunchy enough that I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to get a lot of use of that out of my table. But at the same time, I'm thinking like I can really, I can get a lot of just that kind of inspiration out of it. I know. What have you got? Let me think about some. Give me some of yours.
I know you did a video on it recently. I really enjoyed Index Card RPG.
Yeah, that was another good one.
That was really good. The an interview I did earlier in December was I guess I'm probably more recently biased towards the end of the year because it's what's fresher in my head. But the folklore bestiary by the Merry Mushman was really cool. Let me look up. I just reorganized my shelf. I was for those who are listening. I was telling Todd earlier that I just got this new wall shelf in my house, and I am restocking it back up here now. So as I look over at it, what else? Oh, actually, there is a book. It's not an RPG material, but it's called Vaesen. It's not the Free League RPG game Vaesen,
okay.
But it's the book is by the same person who does all the art in the Free League RPG Vaesen book. And it's a book of just Scandinavian monsters, and it is gorgeous. It's so beautifully printed, and there's just a lot of really inspirational stuff in it. I am a sucker for monster books, so that sort of thing just tickles my brain. And yeah, it was stupid expensive to get here, but it was a very cool book that I think might be one of my favorites of the year, just for how pleasing it is to hold and just go through.
Yeah, those I think there's something about them. I mean, I've had these discussions back and forth about kind of some of the products that get where art is so much the focus that it loses out on some of the usability type stuff. But I think there's no question that sometimes these books, I almost prefer if you just do the art book and just make it just really cool. And so, because sometimes when you try to combine both, some parts don't hold up, but it could be that kind of that trap a little bit of. I think that like Maze of the Blue Medusa might be the classic example of people getting caught up in the art and just the uniqueness of the layout.
Yeah, for me, it's more sport. I think it's probably it was so art focused that I was like, I'm not interested, which I'm sure is blasphemy to some, but I don't know. It was one of those products where I was like, I don't think this was actually intended to be a game. It was more to be like a portfolio of what.
I feel like when I did the read through, it took me a couple pages to kind of figure out sort of the lay of the land. I actually think they did a little bit better job with that one. I forget what it's called because I actually looked at that this year too. It was one of their kind of source books for Morkborg that had. It was called what's it called? Heretic, I think it might have been called. Where I felt like they just a little bit better with making sure that the legibility, or at least in terms of understanding the tables and things inside that layout, was just a little bit more clear. I felt like to me. Than the base book. I mean, Errant was really cool. I think I spent like a couple of weeks going through Errant, which was really good. I haven't seen the finalized copy yet, but that one got kickstarted, did well. Oh yeah, I did Realms. That Realm Fables was really excellent as a source book. I finally got to read through the Kaliris. That's how you pronounce those. I mean, those are like the OGs of like these old books of just gathering all the different, basically putting a pool of just all kinds of different stuff from a lot of the old school books. Speaking of all this stuff, what's your feeling on the OGL?
Oh man. So I put out a little mini episode on it last week during the weekend when it all just kind of blew up. My opinion, and I will preface it with being I'm not a lawyer. and I'm not a publisher, but I'm a person that's spent a lot of time reading contracts and a lot of time with licensing in a technical aspect, not in a creative aspect. My view on it is this is a massive panic over absolutely nothing at the moment.
Really? Okay.
That it doesn't matter what they do with the license, it's what they apply the license to. A license is a lock. Sorry, a license is a key. The content is a lock. So whatever content you have, whether it's your book or it's the SRD or it's whatever, all those things have licenses applied to them. Until they take that OGL 1.1 and put it on something, that's when it becomes effective on that product. So if they go back and they say, hey, we're going to strip OGL 1.0 off of the SRD 3.5 and SRD 5.1 and put this one on it, then sure, I've got the pitchfork and I'm marching with the crowd. But just having the existence of a new OGL doesn't mean much to me, because it may only end up being part of SRD, whatever the one D&D SRD is, SRD 6, which is, in my opinion, what is the most likely aspect here, is that the SRD for one D&D is what this will be applied to. Because if you read the amount of people that have published stuff in the OSR community that have never actually read the OGL is astounding. You can tell because they don't fill out the OGL properly in the back of their books. But if you read the OGL and you look at it, there is nothing in it that tells you to go and look for the most recent version of this license. There's nothing in it that says, find the latest version of our SRD and our OGL on Wizards page or anything like that. So if you have a downloaded copy of SRD 5.1, you've got all the content, and the sole license that is required to use that content is out on it. The lock came with the key. I don't see where the problem is here, unless they go in a way that I think is incredibly legally dubious and will be instantly challenged.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really the big thing. Because I think the thing is that's in the OGL is that they can update the license, right? And they never did after 1.0A update the license, right? And
but
so I think the idea is,
it though, it doesn't. I've seen. I think the one place of all the hysteria around this that I've seen it was good was they went and they talked to the guy who previously worked for Wizards that created the OGL.
Yeah, I saw that. I think the thing is though is that what his intention was versus what they may try to do with it, because there's a couple of words that are missing from the OGL that would have locked it in and said, okay, there's no chance they can do whatever, and those are, unfortunately, they're missing. And apparently, when people are saying about all the free, because it was based on basically a software. Open source software license. The open source software part of it fixed that loophole ages ago. They put in the wording that's missing from the OGL. I think the thing is that ultimately nobody knows, and like you're saying, it's going to be like what gets challenged. Because the one thing I think is interesting is there's a lot of things that people have taken as just written that it's law, and it's not. Like you can't copyright game mechanisms. It's like that's not actually been proven. People keep saying that you can't do it. It's like maybe you can. We don't know. The fact is that the law that people were looking at about that was applied to board game mechanics about like move three spaces kind of thing, which is very different than classes and all the structures. And who knows how far Wizards could get with the 6 attributes, a class. Like are they going to do that? Well, I hope not. Maybe they never will. But the fact is, like, we don't know. And because a few magic words are missing from the OGL, there's going to be that uncertainty because nobody knows. Even the people who said, like, I am a contract lawyer and I can tell you this probably won't float, but that doesn't mean they won't try, and it doesn't mean that they get the right judge that won't say all for it. And it's that uncertainty which I think is just driving people.
Yeah, and I've seen people scream for, well, why doesn't Wizards make a statement? And there's zero reason for Wizards to make a statement at the moment. The document hasn't been released. They're not going to make a statement on something that hasn't actually come out yet to quell fears. From their standpoint, this might be some bad press for them, but it might also just be the type of thing that goes, oh, well, maybe this will make people want to, like, people will be too worried about this. Maybe we also get this other goal. For me, I am in a spot. I'm looking at this. I'm not a publisher, so maybe if I was, I would be in a different mind space of it. But until the actual document gets released and it actually gets applied to content. So a license existing is one thing. A license being applied to content is another. So until they actually apply it to content, and we see which content that is, then I'm not going to worry about it.
I mean, Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to go, but I think the one thing that's an interesting wrinkle with this, and I guess it's maybe like software too, is that products are now kind of products of forever, right? It's not just there's a printing and you go and it's just kind of done. Now stuff sits on these digital marketplaces for eternity. I mean, until our whole thing changes. So a lot of this stuff is going to be everything you've done in the past will still be impacted because you're still selling it. It's not, it's not like, oh, I did that. Hey, I wrote that book and that book is it's whatever, and I'm done with that. So on to the next one. It's like, no, that book is floating around and you're still selling in your marketplace. So I get the bit, but yeah, I think people are, and look, there are other people who are like, oh, why hasn't insert name of massive content creator, third-party content creator come out? Why hasn't Critical Role said anything? Why hasn't Matt Colville said anything? Why? It's like, what do you want them to say? If I was making millions,
they don't have any more information
than, one, they don't, and two, like, I love the people. And look, I'm not trying to say you shouldn't be an activist. You shouldn't stand up for what you want, but when you're in the situation when you're potentially making multiple $1 million working with this company, then you can talk to me about how easy it is to quit and just say, I stand with the people and I'm out. Like,
here's what my actual prediction of how this is all going to end. So I rubbed my crystal ball. I scried to the future, and this is my vision of what actually happens. OGL comes out here in the not so distant future. Some people have said the 13th. Who knows? It'll come out. It's coming out as a way for companies like, say, Critical Role or all these other massive third-party companies to see what's there so they can prepare themselves for when the SRD drops. SRD will drop. It'll be applied to SRD 6 or whatever they call the 1D&D SRD. And they may even release a new SRD 5.2 to cover 5e material. It won't get rid of the 5.1 SRD that has OGL 1.0 on it, but it'll be it may have updates from the more recent books that came on at the tail end of 5e. And you might say, well, then why would anybody ever release content using 5.2? They've got the 5.1 one. And I think the answer to it, what the carrot or the stick, depending on how you view this subject, will be that if you want to have your content available on D&D Beyond, or if you want it available in their new VTT, you will have to publish under OGL 1.0. And I think within the same calendar year, the contract with One Bookshelf or Drive Through RPG or DM's Guild, whatever you want to call it, that contract will expire, and you will see all the DM's Guild program or the DM's Guild program that is currently running over there will be migrated over to D&D Beyond.
Oh, and again, I didn't know about that wrinkle.
Well, yeah, because I mean that DM's Guild is with One Bookshelf. It's a contract that they run. D&D Beyond is going to be the new source for everything. I think
I didn't know. It makes sense. I just didn't know the contract was up. I didn't know the timing.
Yeah, I don't know the exact date. I believe it's within the next 16 months, but that's part of the same reason why One Bookshelf went and, when air quotes for everybody who's listening, partnered, aka got bought by Roll20, was they went and said, well, Wizard of the Coast just announced that D&D Beyond is getting going to be the source for all their future content, and they're creating a VTT. Let's go find a VTT company so that we can still partner with them and get some of our content on there.
Totally.
So that's what I think is going to happen, is that the OGL 1.1 is mostly going to be focused on content that will be sold on D&D Beyond and available in that VTT under some sort of a guise of, hey, in order for us to redistribute your content, Mr. Content Creator, we need you to use this license. That's why you need to give them the rights to all that stuff and everything.
Yeah, someone said, and again, I don't know if they're right or wrong, that a lot of the part about them with the content part, that part of that was kind of for indemnity purposes, that's not actually unusual, and that people don't use that clause the way people in our circle were talking about. They're going to take your content and republish it. Like, even if that was what they're going to do, unless you happen to create the next coming of Dritz Do'Urden, I don't care. Like, you're silver platinum seller that sold 200 copies on drive-through, it's nothing to them. Like, don't. And by the way, if you're already on publishing on D&D on DM's Guild, you've already gave up your soul.
Yeah. If you look at all the clauses that people are talking about as being controversial of the OGL 1.1, so ignoring the panic-stricken aspect of it on authorizing, which again, I think that on authorizing is basically saying, hey, if you're using OGL 1.0, you can't combine it with content from OGL 1.1. We're not anything that has this license on it. It doesn't authorize 1.0 on it. That's what I think that wording is actually referring to. But all the other controversial aspects of OGL 1.1 are basically clones of the DM's Guild program. The content moderation, it's in the DM's Guild program. The signing the rights to the content over to Wizards, it's in the DM's Guild program.
It's actually slightly better because the DM's Guild, you just give it to Wizards. Wizards owns it from the time you publish it. Whereas in this one, you still own it. They just get some perpetual license that, all the good wording is in their part of when you get it, they get some perpetual free license to So at least at this point, you still own it. Whereas in DM's Guild today, if you publish it, it just goes to Wizards and, bye-bye. So
the
for all the
difference
folks
is,
who've been doing that route already, it's not even a change it's better. It's slightly better.
Well, the caveat to put on that is that the reason why the clauses are like they are in the DM's Guild is because your Wizards is allowing you to use their IP, so they're allowing you to use a beholder.
Right.
With OGL 1.1, you still won't be able to use a beholder in your content. But yes, the rights are a little bit better in terms of if your only option was the DM's Guild program or OGL 1.1, yes, OGL 1.1 is still better. But yeah, the reason why that's there in the DM's Guild program is because of,
though I always felt like just make a reholder and then it's yours.
Exactly.
As opposed to I got to use a beholder, so now I lose everything and then it's like you only get like 30 or 40% of the cut. You pay an enormous price for getting to say the word beholder or put it literally in the Forgotten Realms or something, which I feel like is too big of a price. But for all those folks, like it's not worse than that. So
yeah, I urge people to one, realize that anytime that you read something in a news report and you have a strong reaction to it, ask yourself why you have that strong reaction. Because you've got a lot of news reporters that I don't think are very well versed in licensing that are making very wild affirmative claims one way or another. And I think it's great to be aware that this might happen in the future, but I think it's too soon to burn the world down over it.
I mean, I think it's great that people are starting to wake up and say, maybe we don't need to support these guys that don't seem to care about us. Like all that stuff is great, but I don't think you need to tear down other people. Like look for other targets, like Critical Role. You don't need to go find them and burn their house down if they stand not to do it. I mean, they're in a totally different ballpark than the rest of us. And hey, look, that's where I would love to be in that situation. And then some people can yell at me because I'm partnering up with the man because I'm making millions of dollars a year. Like, come on. Like, and people on the internet, I always say, are so quick. Like there's nobody more revolutionary or whatever. Like, like I love seeing when the player advice, like I've got a problem player at my table and all the internet comments are kick him out, drop it. I'd leave that game. It's like, yeah, because you're on the internet and it's not your actual game. Like show me you doing that in person. Like all you people who are saying Critical Role, go look at their check stubs and then come back to me and say, okay, I'm actually making, barely minimum wage, living at my parents' house. Now I'll take their pay stubs for a couple of months and then I'll turn around and say, you know what, I'm going to quit that because of this outrage. Like it's very easy for all of us to spectate on the side and put everyone else in the situation of having to, act proud. Like, yeah, with my, less than 5,000 subscriptions on YouTube, I can talk massive about all the stuff I'm going to do. But guess what? Because they don't care about me and I'm not getting anything from them. So it's very easy to make that kind of transaction. Let's just, we tend our own gardens then. No,
yeah.
It wouldn't be a problem.
A lot of this gets done on social media, and people need to remember that social media lives and dies by how outrageous and how reactionary they can make people feel at any given point in time, whether that is good or negative, more often than not negative. So if you realize, I think the realization just has to be, you have to know you're being manipulated so that you can some way be able to go, okay, and just look at it rationally.
And the sad fact of it is, in terms of the OGL and a lot of the stuff, is the mainstream D&D players have no idea about the stuff and they don't care. No. I mean, if I hadn't gotten involved in doing the YouTubing and things like that, I would never have known about the OGL. I would not have cared. I never read the fine print at the back of those books. It doesn't care. You're just going to keep going what you go. It may be annoying, but probably 90% of the D&D universe is absolutely blissfully unaware of any of the stuff that people are howling in rage about. Now, I mean, I think that stuff should be put out there, but I think people need to be realistic. Like, you think that someone on TikTok saying, well, I'm not buying any more D&D stuff, like, that's not enough to get Wizards concerned,
No.
at the moment.
But ignoring Wizard stuff,
yeah,
you've got stuff.
You've
got stuff that has been put out, and you've got stuff that's in your Finish It.
Yes.
Where do people find your stuff? And
man, well,
where will they find your stuff when you do finish it? Because you will finish it.
That's a good question. I hope I will, because I have other stuff I want to do, but I feel like I have to do the zine first, because the long-suffering people who were waiting for that have been waiting too long, and I just feel like I can't do something. I mean, and that's kind of the whole thing with the whole challenge within the challenge, right? Is it's easy, and this was my whole thing by trying to finish it, was it's easy to just jump on the next thing. Well, I was working on my world building, but now I'm going to jump over and do this mega dungeon, and now this other thing. So it's like, no, I need to stop, and I need to get when I'm done. So right now I've been putting stuff on Itch. Itch is a good space. That's where you can find my hashtag Dungeon23 helper if you're interested in such, which it's pay what you want, so you can just grab it for free. A bunch of people actually have given me money for it, which I super appreciate. It's just it's always kind of stunning when I just throw it out there and someone's like, here's $1 or $2 or whatever. It's nice, but totally not necessary. You can go grab that there. I've been putting in I think I've called it unnamed. Right now it's called what? Unnamed Hexcrawl Adventure, Unnamed Starter Hexcrawl Adventure, I think is the name of the thing, where I've been dropping in my my updates as I've been working through that. I have there's a jam. It's up on Itch also, called hashtag Finish It 23, which is I'm also kind of throwing stuff in there, and I think it's got a few people who have joined that. Yeah, that's going to be the interesting going forward. Is where does this stuff go? I mean, drive-throughs kind of had some issues, but then Itch in places, if you're going to print it, you can't print. They don't have a print facility. I don't know if I get it going, if I can. I don't really know how it works. If I was going to say, hey, what Exalted Funeral seems to be kind of the if you're not on drive-through, or you don't want to be on drive-through, or in addition to drive-throughs, kind of that other space for sort of mixed print and digital media. But I need to finish it before I can worry about seeing if I can get it up on those kinds of marketplaces. So I'm not sure.
I had a conversation end of last week. It hasn't been gone up on the podcast yet, with Direct Sun. That the episode will probably air today or tomorrow. But we were talking about some of the stuff that he's published, and he publishes on TTRPG and a few other places, and the exclusivity that TTRPG asks for, if you choose not to go that route, they severely hamper how much money you can make. Like, the cut that they take increases. Yeah. But you can totally choose to not, go with them as an exclusive and then print wherever you like. I know a lot of folks use Exalted Funeral. Here in Canada, there's Ratty and Canady, and there's a few other places that if you have a zine that you want to get, distributed around, so you're not handling the printing and shipping.
Their latest adventure, Aberrant Reflections, I also looked at this past year. It was also very good, and that was another one. The one before that, which was was another one of those super surprises. Where when I first got, I don't remember if they contacted me or I contacted them, or anyway, I ended up getting a hold of it and I saw it and I was like, oh, this is a Zelda. I remember it ended up sitting in my shelf for a while. I was like, Zelda inspired adventure, and I was like, puzzle based adventure, and I was like, this sounds frankly sounds awful. Like, I'm not a big fan of the, like, what a lot of people think of as the puzzles. We're gonna enter a room, and the example I always use on my channel is, you're gonna enter a room and there's a Sudoku on the floor. Like, when you solve it, the door opens. Like, no interest in that at all. So I had very little hopes when I finally was like, okay, I had it. He sent me a print copy. I've been staring at me, like, okay, I'm finally gonna sit down and do it. And then I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And the puzzles actually make sense. They fit within the theme. This is awesome.
Yeah, that was how I first came in contact with him, was that I had seen his ideas behind puzzles, and I was like, I generally, much like you, hear somebody say I made a puzzle dungeon and kind of have an eye roll and be like, oh, that's so not going to totally be for me. But I was like, all right, well, you think it's good. Come on here and convince me why this stuff is good. And yeah, he did. And it was a great episode, but yeah, fantastic products. I completely agree. Go check those out. Yeah. But if you get a chance, when it goes up here next day or so, take a listen. The whole thing is interesting, but he does go on to talk about a little bit about, the publishing side of it. We're mostly talking about Kickstarter on this newest one. But yeah,
I'll definitely check it out. I'll have to get them to come on stream with me sometime, since I've looked at a couple of things. These are nice enough. They're sending me a version of a print copy of the Aberrant Reflections as well, which is also very good. So even though it might sound bad, please check out. And you can check out my read-throughs if you want to go through. If someone's listening and they're like, "Yeah, I want to check this out, but I don't want to spend money on it. It's on a sight unseen." Well, you can listen or watch me as I go through it. Tons of fun. Yeah, drive-through. I remember when I first, because I do have like one thing on drive-throughs, a tiny, or maybe I have two like tiny little one-page nothings on drive-through. I definitely went for the non-exclusive. And yeah, they do take a bite. They take a nice bite, but they can print out. They can, the thing is, like, nobody else, maybe Exalted Funerals getting there, can print, have as much capabilities in terms of digital and the printing part. And I kind of feel like the role-playing games, is particularly maybe the OSR space, there's something like it similar to records, where there is still this kind of thing about having the physical printed pieces. So as wonderful as itch is, you probably tend to have itch and something else, because people want to have the printed pieces, like more in OSR maybe than in 5th edition or anything else. But even in those things, people love their printed materials. And like drive-through can not only print out those, they can print out cards, they can print out, like, they got that kind of part on lock. And I unfortunately haven't seen anyone challenge them as far as setting up. Like, I don't know, maybe I haven't really looked at Exalted Funeral so much, so I don't know if they can do all kinds of other stuff, but it's kind of really easy on drive-through to. I know Lulu can do it too, but it's not.
Yeah, it's not quite the same.
Not quite the same. Hopefully someone will challenge them, but it's going to be, and that's what I feel like. If anything good in the short term is going to come out, all the OGL stuff is to funnel people towards independent creators and help line their pockets and not line Hasbro's pockets as much.
Yeah, I agree with you there. There's more content. We live in an age where there's more content than any person can possibly consume, and often some of the really great stuff. I mean, there's also a lot of not so great stuff, but a lot of the really great stuff is coming from not the major companies that you think of when you think of various games.
Totally. And that's where all the really new ideas are coming from. I mean, I don't know when the last time I pulled open kind of a Wizards book and thought that, like, oh my gosh, I mean Wizards of the Coast, not about wizards particularly, but and found some like really kind of new and sort of, interesting there.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So a lot of folks have found you on YouTube, or they've seen you on other podcasts or what have you. So they know you as maybe they know you as I did, as the guy who had the fish background, or as the Hex guy, or what have you. But what is something about Todd, as we wrap up here? What's something about Todd that people may not know, that put out there, that what's another side of you that we don't see? I usually ask people to tell me what question I should have asked, but I feel like for you, I want to know more about Todd. So what's something about Todd that people don't know about that maybe they should?
What is something about me? Well, I love cats. I got 2 cats. I think one of them popped up on one of my shorts. I don't feature them at all. I always thought like I should get a second webcam and then I can just switch to and just turn it on my cat, because usually one of my cats is laying on the corner of the bed, like just out of camera shot, and something like that. So I love my cats. I don't know what else. I don't know. Give me a question. Is there anything else? I don't know. I feel like I don't know if I'm saying I'm an open book, but I mean, a lot of my streams are just me talking to myself, it feels like at times.
All right, well, I'll throw you a bone on it, just for fun, because it's something that I have an equal love for, I'm assuming, given what's behind you right now. So on our video chat right now, I'm looking at Todd, and he's got a wall of board games behind him. What is if you're going to sit down with people that you have just met, or your wife's invited some friends over, you guys are going to have a board game night, what board game are you whipping out to test the waters between these new groups?
Oh, that's a good question. So I have to say, it's not the simplest game, but I would maybe say Wingspan, which isn't actually featured there, but it is one I have, because even though it has difficulty levels that I think it will take folks a little bit to come to grips with. It's got that they call it table presence, right? Where you put this down on your table, and you just go like, ooh, someone sees it and like, wow, I want to play. And Wingspan has that like in spades, and it's theming that everybody can get behind. Because I love games about like, going in a dungeon, doing stuff we do on a role playing. It's like, yeah, going into dungeons, killing things. We're doing a war game or something. But if these are friends and I don't really know them and they're not in stuff, that's not going to fly with them, or like, like a lot of the classic games. You're 19th century Dutch farmers, and you're like, it's like that. No one, you see the eyes glazing over already, but you put out the birds and you show them some of the cards and the colors and things, and I feel like it's just appealing to everybody. I don't know. Maybe there's some jaded, hardcore people that are like, "What? We're not killing something? Like, where's the no claws on these?" Like something like that would be like, "I hate birds," but I feel like everybody can get behind the birds, and you get the eggs that look like you want to eat them. They just, I don't know, they
look like the Cadbury
put them in your mouth. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you bring out your inner infant, and you just want to pop them in your mouth, and just on the illustrations are amazing. And I don't know, I feel like they nailed that part so well that I can see why it just, even though I don't think it's a good, I don't think it's a good entrance to board gaming in terms of difficulty. Like something like Ticket to Ride is probably easier, or Catan, but I think in terms of what's going to get, like, you're going to get some people around, you put the little birdhouse out there, and you get all the colorful boards. Like, what's someone going to see? It's like, oh, I want to try. I want to see what that's all about. I feel like Wingspan has got that.
Yeah, I agree. I actually just got Wingspan. It was a Christmas gift this year to me.
Nice.
I had seen it previously, but yeah, it's so I got that for Christmas this year. Ticket to Ride is a favorite of mine as well. I've got looking here beside me, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different boxes for Ticket to Ride, because it's one of my wife's favorite games.
Oh yeah, and I want to shout out to if you don't have it, if you play often with 2, I don't know your family size, there's the 1911 expansion. It's a must.
Oh,
yeah,
sorry,
or 1910.
This is the 1910 one. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, they have one. I know. I think they're slightly different years. One's for the European board, one's for the US board. But what that does is it makes it so much better for 2 players. Because if you play Ticket to Ride vanilla game with 2 players, there's just too much wide open space. Everyone can just do what they want, and it's just not fun. Whereas you play with that little expansion, and it just reduces the amount of cities you can get to, which closes up those routes and gives you that kind of excitement. Because that was the one thing when I played with my wife the first time, it was just like, this is just kind of boring, because nobody could cut anybody else off, and it was just a matter of who got the better routes. Basically, it was just like, who was going to win.
Yeah.
And then we got that expansion. It was like, oh, this makes a big difference.
Yeah, with Ticket to Ride, it really does come down to the map, picking the right map for the size of the group you have. There's some of the maps that have some really cool choke points.
Do you have the Markland? That's always the one I hear is like the best Ticket to Ride one. Is this Ticket
Which
to
one's
Ride
that?
Mark? It's Markland. I don't know. I think it's it's a German based.
Oh no, I've got the American one, the European one, India / South America, I think it is, or no, India / Africa, and then what we introduced my son to with that game, because he always seen my wife and I and our friends playing the train game, so we have Ticket to Ride Junior as well,
Nice.
which has now been aged out, to be fair. But if you have somebody who's like in that 4, 5, 6 range, it's a fantastic way to introduce them into.
I didn't have that one, but my daughter and I used to play the Carcassonne, which was actually quite.
And
quite
you just
good.
always did your daughter always take the strategy of just constantly getting the pirate birds or whatever it was?
Oh no, I think that's Catan.
Sorry, that's Carcassonne Junior. Yes.
Carcassonne. There's no way to really block it. I mean, you could just be mean with where you place the tiles. It's basically the only way to block. But it's still, we got a lot of fun out of it. What's your favorite Ticket to Ride of those expansion boards? I only have US.
I prefer. So I had the India one is new for us. We've only gotten it to the table once, so I don't want to form an opinion on it yet. But if I had to choose between the US and the Europe, I prefer the European one, just because there's a few more mechanics.
Okay.
There's tunneling through mountains and stuff that require things a little bit differently. There's hubs, so if you do get locked out of a city, you can put a hub on the city and use somebody else's path through it if you need to.
Oh, I like that idea.
So yeah, there's some extra mechanics in there. So I do like the European version. But yeah, I've got just oodles of these games.
Have you played Wingspan yet? Have you had a chance to play it?
No, the box has not even been opened yet. So I got Wingspan and Power Grid as 2 games for Christmas this year that I have not yet opened. But
I have not played Power Grid. That's an old school one. That one's like super crunchy.
Yeah, that one I had on my wish list for the reason that it's super crunchy. I want to dive into that one.
Does that have like a solo mode, or is your wife, is she into those super crunchy games also?
Yeah, we've got a few friends that we bring over for that sort of stuff, so that'll be good. And I think
that's the surprising thing about Wingspan is it is crunchier than you might think. Given its like mainstream success story, you might think, oh, it's super simple. Like it's not.
Yeah, my recommendation for people of new games I've gotten recently. As I'm looking over at my shelf, sorry, my microphone's my audio is probably in and out as I turn my head. Is if you enjoy card games, is The Crew. It is gin rummy ramped to a billion, and it's amazing if you enjoy card games. And then
there's two crews, right? Isn't there a newer crew?
Yeah.
Because the first crew is the space, and the next one was like underwater or something. I mean, the theming is almost next to nothing in the game.
Yeah, the theming doesn't matter, but the underwater one makes the game more replayable. Whereas the original one, the missions were laid out in the book, and once you completed those missions, you're like, okay, great, I completed the game, I'm done.
I see.
The second one solves that problem by making it every time you play it, it's a different experience. And then the other one I would recommend is my son is a big fan of the Sushi Go games, which have been around forever and are really great.
Those are cool.
But a new one that we got here over Christmas for him is called Go Nuts for Donuts.
I can get behind that.
Yeah, also a great game that I recommend people check out. It's very similar to Sushi Go. It's got a simple mechanic, but the art is in the same vein, and it's fun.
I really dig the Dune Imperium game. I don't know if you've had that one or a chance to play. Really good. The unfortunate thing for me for that one is that the theme, I love it. Harder sell for people who aren't kind of sci-fi people. That's that's kind of the Wingspan thing. Is the theme is anybody can get involved. There are lots of other games that are great, but then I feel like I have to try to sell them on the theme, or just tell them ignore the theme or don't worry about the theme. Whereas with the Wingspan, it's like it's birds. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's warm and fuzzy, cuddly birds. You're good.
Meadow's also very good. Kind of hits that same nice point because you're just building this like walk through the woods. It's really pretty, but there's some interesting things going on there. But it has also a very nice kind of table setup. It's got really pretty, colorful illustrations, and it's a really good game under there. But again, I feel like when you're just trying to entice people to the table, I feel like a theme that's going to appeal to the largest swath of people, and also it being kind of colorful and pretty, is important when you want to try to get people to play. Like my wife will play some games. I know she's not going to play Dune Imperium because she's just not that interested in the going and killing people to try to conquer Arrakis, whatever it's just. But if I can definitely sell her on birds, or I could sell her on a lovely journey through a meadow, or something of that nature. I'm envious of you and your group that you got them into some really hardcore games. Like I miss that.
Yeah, the secret for me was I started them off on all the easy ones, and they looked at it, they were like, this is going to be way too hard, and it'll only take me a few turns to teach you how to play the game. And now they believe me on that for all of them. So like eventually I will crush their dreams by having a game that's too complicated, but they believe me and trust me enough when I say this will be easy, we'll learn it. So that now I've been able to move them into more crunchier stuff, and things have been good there.
I feel like where the games put the crunch really helps a lot. And I do like I guess I hate to keep bringing up Wingspan, but one thing that Wingspan does is it makes your decision point on any one of your terms is pretty easy. You basically have three options.
Yeah.
Three options, and you can't even necessarily do every option, because sometimes you end up getting locked by other ones. Like you can get eggs, but then sometimes to do something else, you need to have eggs. If you don't have, so you end up going, okay, well, so each one of your turns, you're not. Some games will give you like you've got 1,000 options, and we're going through 8 phases this turn. Whereas Wingspan's like you're just going to be doing this little thing here. It's figuring out how to all those things to line them up to kind of get your sort of workflow for that's where the kind of puzzle, and of course the randomness of which birds, because the birds all different abilities, and trying to put those together into a way that makes sense for you. But I really like that where they kind of lock down. It's like, we're not going to give you a million choices from the jump. We're just going to give you these 3 choices. And then I think once you get through a few rounds, suddenly you're like, oh, now I understand. And then the next game I can come back and try to refine, try to be more thoughtful about specific choices, because you can end up at the end of the game. It's like, oh, if I'd only done this thing, I would have scored better. Whatever.
Yeah, we'll have to get together at some point, Todd, and play some on like Tabletop Simulator or Tabletopia or whatever
If you can teach me, I need to learn how to play them.
Oh, it's silly easy. It's really easy. The controls are a little bit.
That's where it
clunky,
gets me.
But once you've got the with I'm not sure about Tabletopia, but I know with Tabletop Simulator, people sometimes have some issues with the controls. Once you get your head around those, the games just flow nice and easy.
Cool. You could be my Sherpa, because I would definitely love to do it. And I just want to end by saying one thing. Can we please stop having games just do victory points?
Yes.
Can we please just do? And I remember I posted this ages ago to like one of the board game Reddits, and people were like slamming into me. But it's like to me it's like it's so silly when you come up with something thematic. So I'll use Wingspan for example. At the end, you're counting points. Could you not even make those points something like government grants? Oh, if you get so many visitors to your bird sanctuary, like there are so many ways, even just to take the concept of points and just theme it to make it something. Or you have a game where it's like, we're going to conquer the world. Great. So do I win when I conquer the world? No, you win by having the most victory points. It's like, what the heck does that mean? Why can't it just be whoever has the most, even if we're going to say whoever has the most territory? And by the way, territory is going to be measured in some kind of resource, which basically is counting points.
Yeah.
But in the end, at least it feels like, oh, I have done this, or I've gotten more seats in the Senate than you. And even though that's points. Theme it up, do something with it. Don't just go. I feel like everyone just falls back on like VP, and it's why do something.
Monopoly has been around forever, and they taught us how to do it with property and dollars. And that's on their theme. So the rest of us can figure it out with the new
Absolutely. Game that's the end of my TED talk. Down with victory points, up with some kind of thematic points.
So where should people go to find you, Todd?
Oh, I guess YouTube's still the best place. YouTube.com. Now they're doing this thing where you can have kind of an @ you can do this sort of @ thing. So you can just go to youtube.com @Hexed Press will work. I think there's make sure it's Hexed, HEXED PRESS. You'll know it's me if you get to a bunch of stuff about weightlifting, and then you'll see one of my videos. I'm the one that's not doing things about weightlifting. Didn't realize that when I got the name, but there's like hex for like hex weights, and so I eternally curse myself when I picked. If I'd only done a slight smidgen more research in my name, I probably would have picked something that didn't overlap so heavily with something totally unrelated to my field. But there it is. I'm also on itch. You can find links to all this stuff. I feel like if you just go to Hexed Press or you look up Hexed Pressman on Twitter or Mastodon, or as you said, I have scattered myself across social media. So you can find me TikTok. TikTok has some great stuff with interacting with people that I hope kind of YouTube Shorts. I think they might. But there's some neat stuff you can do there where you can stitch on other people's videos to respond to questions. And if you've seen my shorts, I usually do them and then TikTok and put them into YouTube. And so you can do some kind of neat different ways of interacting with people, which I appreciate. But I'm on, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere. You and the folks who are following our every move in the shadow realm, everywhere they are, I am. So.
All right, sounds good. I will try to put as many links to all of those things and a bunch of stuff that we talked about, like the various games, in the show notes. And thank you so much for coming on to talk with me. Hopefully, folks got some good ideas for how to get through Dungeon 23 or finish at 23. I think finish at 23 is probably a better theme because that applies to Dungeon 23 if you've started it.
It applies to everything. That's kind of the idea. Yeah. It apply to anything you want to work on and finish. Come join me and let's finish some stuff, right? I mean, that's what we want to do at the end of the day. I think most of us anyway want to get something done, right?
Exactly. All right. Well, I'm going to finish this and send it to future me for editing, and it'll be up very soon. But thank you guys very much for listening. And Todd, thanks again so much for coming onto the show. It was awesome.
I appreciate it. Love being here. Happy to come anytime.
All right, folks, that's going to wrap up this episode of the Redcaps Podcast. I hope you enjoyed, you learned something, and that you are eager to come back for more. www.theredcaps.net has all the links to all the ways to contact me, and I would love to hear from you. I will also have all the links to all the things that we talked about, or as many as I can come up with, down in the description of this podcast. Thank you again so very much for listening, and remember, never let your caps dry out. Stay safe, have fun, we'll talk again soon.